Hey there, it's Olivia-Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to tell you the 10 biggest books on my TBR. These are the biggest books, the ones with the most pages, and the ones that I find a little bit daunting because of that. They are a lot of classics, but there's also a fantasy book and a non-fiction book on here as well. So we are going to start with the three Dostoyevskys and get them out of the way in the beginning. Number one, first and foremost. So these are the three oldest books on my TBR ever. These are the books that I've owned for the longest and I have not read. And that's because Dostoyevsky, that man does not keep it short. I have already read Crime and Punishment by him, so I know that he keeps it quality, even though he also keeps it quantity, page-wise. The first book of his that is on my TBR that's the longest page-wise is The Brothers Karamazov. It's a very famous novel of his. I don't know anything about it other than people love it, and I am prepared to love it too. I'm actually very excited to read that one, which is why it's his book that I'm saving for last. I also have this book of his on my TBR, and that is the one that I'm going to try and read my way through in February. I've actually already started. I'm 150 pages in and I'm having a very, very good time. This one is quite comedic and funny in nature, and it's about a silly little prince who doesn't quite know what he's doing, and it's really light-hearted compared to Crime and Punishment, so it's a very different tone. And then there's also Devils, which is on my TBR, and it's another one that I know nothing about and I hear even less about from people, but it just sounds like it's going to be a Dostoevsky, and that's why I got it. I'm very happy to read Dostoevsky books. Then we've got the books on my TBR that are so long that they are split into two separate volumes on my shelf. It's not counting for one book on my shelf, it's actually counting for two, and one of those is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Dickens, who was sometimes paid by the word or by the page or something, knew how to draw out a story and write words for words' sake. Sometimes I feel like his books aren't like that, and then you get a very good book, but sometimes you can really tell. And so I'm curious to see what I'll think about this massive tome called David Copperfield, which it sometimes works for people very well and sometimes doesn't, and I'm curious to see where I'll fall. A friend recently called that a sushi book, where some people love it or hate it, and I would like to love it. I've really been reading a lot of Charles Dickens lately and having a very good time, so I hope that I will again have a very good time. Another book on my shelf that's split into two volumes because it's so big is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This is a very well-known classic about a policeman who is chasing an escaped convict, and I have already read 1/4 of this book. I'm 25% of the way through, which means I've read about 250 to 350 pages, because this massive tome, if you put them all together, is over 1,000 pages, and I was loving it. I really like the writing style. It's beautiful. I know that Victor Hugo is another one who uses many words, but he uses many words and he can use as many as he wants because he uses them well, and it was doing such good character work and such good building of the story that I was entranced. I stopped reading because of my TBR challenge at the time, but I very much want to pick this one up again as well. A more recent addition to my TBR that's also split into two volumes is Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. Now this is a comedic novel, I believe. That's what I remember of people describing it, a like comedy of sorts, and it's following Tom Jones. It is typically the full title is called The History of Tom Jones, and so I like a funny book. I'm surprised that this one is so long, but I'll see what I think about it. I've heard good things about Henry Fielding's books as well. It's just one of those classics that I've heard about on my classics reading journey, and I would like to try it myself. Also, I got beautiful editions in a secondhand bookshop, so that also enticed me to get it. And then for the last of the books that's so big that it's split into two tomes, we have a fantasy novel, and that is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I was given this from Hannah when she was unhauling books, and I said why not, because I read the first book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson and I really enjoyed it, and I found those 500 pages whizzed by, so why not get his chunkiest book yet and just take it when it was free. I don't think I can read Way of Kings yet. I think it's one where I have to finish the Mistborn trilogy to be able to get there. There's this whole reading order for Brandon Sanderson, and I still need to read the rest of the Mistborn series, but now it's on my shelves. It is waiting for me in two separate books, and it's a big chunky boy that I'm gonna have to tackle reading at some point. Moving on to some non-fiction that's really big, I recently bought myself a copy of The Red Comet, The Life of Sylvia Plath, and this is a non-fiction book, a biography of everything Sylvia Plath from her birth to her death and everything in between, and it's on her writings and who she is. And this big book comes in at over a staggering 1,000 pages. I believe it's specifically 1,152 if I'm remembering off the top of my head. It's got photos in it, it's got images in it, and it just, as someone who is a big Sylvia Plath fan, if you don't know, she is my favourite poet ever, I am just really fascinated. This is the biography that the Sylvia Plath community, because there's a community of us, say is the one to read, the information book to read. It will have all the knowledge and it's accurate. So I saw it at a very cheap price and I decided to get it for myself, and at some point I'm going to very slowly tackle that big book. And then the other big book non-fiction I have is Black and British by David Olusoga, and this is it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a big non-fiction book about Black and British history, and I think a lot of the big anti-racism and history books that I see about blackness are very US focused and US centric. That might be because of the media that I consume, but also I didn't really have those textbooks growing up because I lived outside of Britain, so I had international history, and yeah, it's just a history that I've never particularly studied or been taught, and so I really wanted this big defining history book to kind of educate me on my Black and British history as someone who is Black and British myself. So I think that's going to be particularly fascinating and insightful to read. I've heard very good things about David Olusoga's research and how he tells that history, so I think it will be a breeze to read as well, because it sounds like it's done very well. But then last but not least, we are going to loop back around to classics, and I'm going to talk to you about Middlemarch by George Eliot. Now Middlemarch is very interesting. I picked this one up because it was one of the Penguin cloth bounds that I wanted to read. I'd heard good things about it, that it's one of those slow and steady novels, but it's actually very enjoyable as well. And I always thought George Eliot was a man until on booktube someone said she, and I was like, wow, George Eliot is a woman, and that actually moved it higher up on my TBR list and made me more excited to read it. And there you have it, very quickly in a whizzed through form. Those are 10 of the biggest books on my TBR. I forgot to mention that I did not include bind-ups. I did not include collections such as the complete works of Oscar Wilde, which is also on my shelf but would be one of the biggest books if I counted it. But yeah, those are some big books. I don't feel intimidated by big books, but I guess I don't pick them up too much. It's a bit of a weird balance. I do pick up like 400 to 500 page books, but I think picking up a classic or a non-fiction book that's big is an entirely different story, because those definitely take a bit more brain span, a bit more attention while I'm reading. Please let me know in the comment section down below what is one of the biggest books that's on your TBR. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!